Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves. You don't have to speak German to understand that this advert is designed for shock. Now that I see that many of you are suitably shocked, and some of you have crossed your legs, it's important that you understand that lobby groups around the world are increasingly using such techniques, not only to influence the thoughts and minds of consumers, but also those of the politicians that lobby and of the officials that write legislation. This particular organisation, Deutsche Tierschutzbund, was trying to get support from the German public to ban castration in piglets without anaesthetic. Now, your average German didn't know anything about farming, let alone castration, but it was enough to give them the support they needed to get an animal protection law brought in Germany, which bans castration without anaesthetic from 2017. Now, this kind of technique is actually potentially very dangerous to agriculture. So if we are to have any hope of balancing this kind of messaging to promote agriculture for the great industry that it is, we need to be at the top of our game. A little bit about me. Well, people that know me know that there are two things I am most passionate about. The first, perhaps unsurprisingly, is pigs, and I talk about pigs a lot. The second is the National Pig Association, which is the representative trade association for British commercial pig producers, and I am the current general manager. And although we regularly punch well above our weight as an organisation, we are restricted in resource, both in terms of staff time and in funding. So it's important that we are as efficient and effective as we can be in order to provide the best service for our members. My Nuffield Scholarship, therefore, was to look at who the key influencers are of policy within the major pork-producing countries around the world, to look at how they influence and the techniques that they employ, perhaps to use some of the better ones and to know which to avoid, and how we, as a small lobby organisation, can have the maximum impact with minimum input. So who has the ability to influence and how can they do it? Well, the short answer is anyone can influence, it's just that some are much better at it than others. And there are several key lessons that I learnt that I would like to share with you and that any small lobby organisation could potentially use to be more effective. That first lesson is that people power is most definitely king. The more people that you have saying your message, the quicker it is heard and the more likely it is people will listen. There are many techniques these days that you can use to spread the word, from social networking right through to more traditional techniques, and forming alliances with other groups, particularly in different countries, can help amplify that message even more. UK welfare group Compassion and Well Farming has just done exactly that. Frustrated by lack of action over the upcoming partial sow stall ban, which comes into effect from the 1st of January, and many countries still yet to comply, they joined forces with Eurogroup for Animals, an umbrella organisation for 40 different welfare organisations, and they launched Project Pig. As part of the project, they encouraged their supporters to send postcards, much like the one at the top here, to influential people throughout Brussels. And as an example, head of EU farming organisation COPA has received over 6,000 of these postcards to date, all personally signed on the back. Now, although the Commission say that there's little they can do until the 1st of January to enforce the law, this certainly put a lot more pressure on those countries that have yet to do anything to get on with it. Whilst I was in America, I was very lucky to spend some time with David Salmonson from the American Farmers Bureau in Washington, D.C. He told me that his most influential group is actually farmers themselves. They brought in over 5,000 farmers last year. They briefed them all up, put them in front of key influential individuals on various committees, and got to influence that way. In fact, everyone that I spoke to in DC said that farmers were a very influential lot because they have a very personal message to tell. It's much better than people like me going in there and telling people what I think they want to hear. My second lesson was that we really need to plug the knowledge gap. And I know everyone talks about it, and in every country I went to, people recognize the growing disconnect between the consumer and their food. But vegan and vegetarian lobby groups are definitely using this to their advantage. People, if they want to, should be able to go somewhere to find unbiased and factual evidence about why we farm the way we do. And I did come across some really good examples in the countries that I visited of how people are trying to do that. But my favourite was in Lithuania with processor Krekenavos. They showed me their virtual site tour that they have developed, where members of the public can come in, go onto the web, and basically have an online tour of their slaughtering and processing facilities. This chap down the bottom here tells you in every room what's going on, and they can click on video links to find out exactly what happens there. For Krekenavos, this has done great things. It has stimulated much needed local debate, it's dispelled many myths, but it's also got them a lot of public support. My third lesson is that it's really important to build relationships with key influencers. But equally important is that you need to understand who those key influencers are, because it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. And for companies working in different countries, it's important that they understand the culture, the values, and the language within that country that they're trying to break into. And whilst I was in Moscow, I spoke to a lady called Avril Conroy, who was Chief Operating Officer for Walmart at the time in Russia. And she gave a really good example of two different French retailers who had tried to break into the Russian market. The first, Carrefour, a well-known retailer, just provided a standard store format and expected the Russians to love it. They didn't, and Carrefour failed. The second, Auchan, pictured here, did take time to understand exactly what it was the Russian consumer wanted. Good value, good quality, and everything you could possibly want under one roof. And they have thrived. But even in places like China, where you assume people will have very little influence, apparently they can have a lot more influence than we'd think. I met Mr. Wu, who was chairman of the Guangdong Pig Association in Guangzhou, and he told me that pretty much everybody works for government in some capacity or another in China. Even the association that he worked for was owned by government. And so they took in views and information from their members and fed it in to those committees that were developing the 5-year agriculture plan for China going forward. They could have an influence. But my final point on this particular lesson is that you're much more likely to have a positive influence if you go providing solutions rather than problems. And in the last lesson, the example that I give provides a really good example of that. So the final lesson is that you really have to focus, particularly as a small lobby organisation. You need to pick your battles and consider the consequences of your actions. It's so easy to get carried away on lost causes, which can be very costly. Pictured here, you can see Steve Moffat, a pig farmer from Penobscot in Canada, and somebody I was very lucky to stay with for a few days while I was over there. Until recently, he was vice chair of the Canadian Pork Council. And he told me of a very successful lobby campaign by US farming organisations that achieved what it set out to, but actually gave nothing for the US farmers and almost annihilated the Canadian pig industry. In 2008, following sustained lobbying by the US farmers groups that were looking for a price premium and a label, the US government brought in country of origin labelling. The processors didn't want to spend money on changing all their labels over, so they cancelled a lot of their contracts overnight. And at the time, 8 to 9 million pigs were being moved from Canada into North America for finishing. That market stopped, leaving many of these farmers not only with no place or market to sell their pigs to, but also nowhere to house their pigs. You can imagine the impact that this had. But rather than give up and go home, the Canadian farmers went to their government providing a solution, not a problem. And in this case, it was to provide interest-free loans for them until they could find new markets. They achieved that, and it saved many of them from bankruptcy. For the US farmers, however, there was no price premium to be had. Already, over 90% of the pork traded in America was American, so it had no benefit for them and probably cost their farming organisations a lot of money in time and resource. On legislation too, timing is really important for us, as every piece of legislation that's written has a scheduled review date built into it to ensure democratic accountability. Now, other welfare and environment organisations are much, much better at anticipating those dates than we are. They build up their information and their campaigns ahead of those dates so that they're ready when the review comes in to put their points forward. We need to get a lot better at doing that. And we also need to be able to plan ahead for the challenges, but also remain flexible to deal with short-term issues. So just to recap very quickly, my lessons for lobby groups. People power is very much king. We do need to plug the knowledge gap. We need to take time to develop relationships with key influencers. And we need to remember that focus is very important. So what has this meant for me and my role as General Manager of the National Pig Association? Well, people power certainly helped us for our recent Save Our Bacon campaign, where we used social networking for the first time. And actually, it was quite a hard struggle to get my own producer group to understand that Twitter could be useful for them. Most of them were still talking about you twitface. It was a difficult time. But it definitely showed that it could work to help the public understand why they should be supporting British, but also why prices needed to go up. Secondly, I've spoken to several agricultural organisations, including AHDB and the NFU, to suggest that we work collectively together on a cross-sector website that explains exactly what goes on in farming, to dispel many of the myths, and to have somewhere that people can go to find factual, unbiased evidence. All you have to do is a very short Google search to find out how awful farming is. There's not many places you can go that promote it. We're accessing committees such as EFSA much more than we were, and we're also working more closely with the MPs and MEPs, building much more long-term relationships. And I've also written, or started to write, a 5-year strategic plan for the National Pig Association, so that we can be better at preempting the challenge, but also we can focus on what it is we're trying to do and trying to achieve going forward. So I'd just like to say, over the last 18 months, I've been to 12 different countries. I've made some amazing friends. I've met some really inspirational people, and I have had a truly life-changing experience. I know it sounds a bit cliched. So I'd really like to thank the Nuffield Farming Scholarships Trust and John Stones, my sponsors, BPEX and Merial, for allowing me to have this opportunity. I'd like to thank the National Pig Association, not only for letting me disappear off for weeks on end, but also for having the faith in me and promoting me to General Manager whilst I was somewhere in the middle of China. I'd like to thank my family for always being there to support and encourage me. And I'd like to thank Adam for giving me the courage to believe that anything was possible. And if there should be, by some very slim chance, anyone sat out there wondering whether a Nuffield scholarship is for them or not, seriously, don't think about it. Just do it. You won't regret it.